Ancestral healing and DNA clearing is the missing link when it comes to healing and evolution. And I'll tell you why. We are born with the cellular memory of our parents, our grandparents, our great great grandparents, up to 7 generations back, according to scientific studies they did a while ago. They're now looking at 14 generations. I know that I've gone back 26 generations in one of the healings I did over a decade ago. So, how long is that piece of string really? And what's more important and what I find is more relevant is how compounded some of these traumas are, some of these feelings, some of these belief systems, some of these emotions. Like if you have anger issues, for example, or a belief system that I'm not good enough, or scarcity mentality, what are the chances that both your parents also experienced that? And their parents experienced that, and their parents experienced that. How compounded is that trauma, is that imprint, is that pain in your cellular memory before you're even born? And let's not even get into the soul history that's also experienced that. So, if we really want to get deep and profound healing, we need to be working multidimensionally because it did not start with us. We are not the first person to experience the trauma that we're trying to heal. So, I'll give you some examples of how this does travel through generations. One of the most obvious ways is where we see ourselves repeating the patterns of our parents or grandparents or great great grandparents. I'll give you a very classic example of this. Say you've grown up with, and I'm definitely not saying all men are bad. I know there's a lot of really, really beautiful men out there. But say, for example, you've grown up seeing aggressive men and beaten down women, and that was what the story was for your great grandmother and your grandmother and your mother, and now you're finding yourself also attracting domestic violent relationships. It's a pattern. So we need to look at what are the underlying belief systems that are going on within these patterns. What are our belief systems about men? Do we believe that they are all bad and that they're mean and that we're worthless and we don't deserve love and this is just normal? Because if that's what you believe, you will go on to recreate that. If you are able to shift those beliefs at a deep subconscious and cellular memory, because there are so many beautiful, beautiful men out there, and if you believe that there are, then you will naturally start attracting that. You will create something different because our entire life is created from what we believe to be true. We create our own reality based on our subconscious programming. And so much of that programming is a part of the cellular memory. We come in with that. But we're not locked into it. We can change it. I see it happen all the time. So that's one way it can come through. It's through, the belief systems, and then we go on to recreate the pattern going, how has every woman in my generational line or every man in my generational line been the same? It's just the belief systems. Another way it can show up, and this is where it gets quite interesting, is we can do all the emotional, mental, spiritual work, subconscious reprogramming to clear something. But if we don't get into the cellular memory, we are going to reenact that same pattern. Or you might have someone who's grown up, and they've had the most perfect life, the most perfect childhood, yet they're riddled with anxiety or they're depressed or they're fearful. But there's never been anything to indicate where or how that could have come about. It's hardwired in the cellular memory. And kids are being born more sensitive these days. Life is getting easier. Like if you think about 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 500 years ago, there was war, there was famine, there was rape, there was pillage, there was murder. There was so much more heaviness back then than what there is now. But we seem to be a little bit more mentally challenged now because we are more sensitive. The trauma is so deep in there. And I'll tell you what happens is that the DNA does not adapt to thrive, it adapts to survive. So the survival instinct brings us smaller and smaller and smaller. They did a really cool study with fleas. Fleas jump however high, they jump quite high. And they put these fleas in a jar with a lid on it so they could only jump so high that even when they took the lid off, those fleas for the rest of their life only jumped so high. Their offspring only ever jumped so high. We have put a lid, we've put a ceiling on our own existence. And we don't even realize we've done it because it's all we've ever known. So this is why clearing ancestral healing is so freaking important, so that we can go beyond the limitations of our ancestors. The DNA does not adapt to thrive. It adapts to survive. The subconscious mind is not wired for success. It is wired for survival. And if you've got imprints of pain, of trauma, of fear, of we could get killed, it's not going to happen. The baby deer is born knowing that lion's going to kill it. It's born knowing to fear it. The same thing happens for us. I read a really good example of this in a Denise Lynn book about a woman who grew up and she couldn't be in the same room as an Asian. Ever since primary school, high school, college, and it was very debilitating. She would have panic attacks. She would go into freeze responses. Her parents couldn't understand why, because the only Asians they knew were beautiful, loving, sweet people. She couldn't understand it. And then when she was in her 30s, she was talking to her grandmother, and her grandmother was explaining World War I, where the Japanese came in and raided the village and took her hostage. And that is a massive trauma imprint in the grandmother. Skipped the generational line of the mother and went into the granddaughter. And it was after that she realized that she had the bigger response around the more Japanese looking Asians, and anyone with that kind of skin and that shaped eye, she would be in terror. We are not born hating, but we are born fearing. And if you think about it, we have been at war between races, between religions, between clans, between the masculine and the feminine, within the masculine, within the feminine, since the beginning of time. It's hardwired in our DNA to fear humanity on quite a deep level. And we don't need to be carrying that anymore. There's ways that we can clear it very deeply and profoundly. And we don't even need to know everything that's in there. We can just set the intention to clear it, because we don't need to hold on to it anymore. So that's the importance of ancestral healing. DNA clearing. We are not locked into our DNA. Dr. Bruce Lipton is famous for his studies of epigenetics, and he has proven that 97% of these genetic disorders are actually not locked into the DNA. It is actually a result of the biology of belief, which is the internal environment, which is your emotions and traumas and energetic imprints of, limitation and all that kind of, emotional, mental stuff that triggers the DNA, or the external environment of the patterns that we've learnt, like smoking or drinking or the pollutants, that will actually trigger the DNA into an illness. So we can clear the patterns, we can clear the emotional trauma, and we don't need to be locked into the same fate as our parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents. We owe it to ourselves to be able to live a different life, and we owe it, God, it makes me emotional every time. We owe it to our children and our children's children to free themselves of the crap that has been in the upline for generation after generation and after generation. There are so many of us that have come to be the chain breakers, that have come to be the first in their lineage. I wasn't the first in my lineage, my mother was. I'm the second. My daughter has had so much cleared that she's just pure. She's just pure light. So we can really get in and change big things very quickly, but we've got to know what we're doing. And this is where the sacred ancestral clearing and DNA healing really does that for you. So if you're interested in knowing more about how it works and what we can do, keep looking through this website, keep looking at the videos, and when you're ready to give it a go, let's chat.